Good afternoon, and welcome to the 6th in the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship's monthly live chat series. If you're just joining us for the first time, welcome, and if you've participated in past chats, welcome back. My name is Salaeha Shariff, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the Fellowship Program, and I'll be moderating today's chat. The AAAS Policy Fellowship live chats are an opportunity for you to ask questions of current and alumni fellows and hear from fellows directly as they discuss their experiences in the program, along with their direct policy impacts at the federal government level. Each chat provides a glimpse into the many unique and different fellowship experiences and highlights the diversity of disciplines and career stages that are represented in the program. You can submit a question at any time during the chat by clicking in the question box and then typing in your question there. The S&T Policy Fellowships is where science and policy comes together to change the world, and in the process enhances and transforms your own career path. In this immersive policy experience, you spend a year in one of the 3 branches of the federal government. As a policy fellow, you're taking a step back to retool, reinvigorate, and understand how to apply your background and training broadly to help develop and execute solutions to address today's most pressing societal challenges. You're directly contributing to policy with real-world impact. S&T Policy Fellows gain hands-on policy experience and join a highly influential network of fellows. Fellows and the alumni network represent a broad range of career stages and diverse disciplinary backgrounds. The fellowship program features 7 different program areas. Applicants can and should apply to up to 2 program areas. You can learn more about each program area, including potential host offices, by clicking the Become a Fellows link on the fellowship's website. Eligibility requirements for the fellowship program include holding U.S. citizenship and a doctoral degree in science or engineering. Applicants with a master's in engineering and 3 years of professional experience are also eligible to apply. We are currently accepting applications for the 2017-18 fellowship year, and the application deadline is November 1st. You can visit the fellowship's website to get more details about the program as well as the application process. So today's chat features current and alumni fellows with discipline backgrounds in the social sciences. They are here to answer your questions and discuss the impact that social scientists can have in policy at the federal level. So now I'd like to introduce our panel of fellows. Our first panelist is Emily Eisenhauer. Emily is a current AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the Environmental Protection Agency in their Office of Research and Development. In her fellowship, she is pursuing projects on community-engaged research, climate resilience, and integrating social and environmental science. Our second panelist, previously Emily worked for the Florida International University Center for Labor Research and Studies and the University of Miami Office of Civic and Community Engagement. Emily received her PhD in sociology. Our second panelist is Ariela Zycherman. Ariela is also a current fellow and is hosted at the National Science Foundation in the Directorate for Engineering in the Division of Chemical, Bioengineering, Environmental, and Transport Systems. Prior to her fellowship, she was a postdoctoral fellow of food studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Ariela holds a PhD in applied anthropology. Our third panelist is Irina Feygina. Irina is alumna of the fellowships, and she was a Congressional Fellow sponsored by the American Psychological Association, which is a partner society of the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships. Irina was hosted in the office of Senator Michael Bennet, where she worked on their energy and environment portfolio. She is currently the Director of Behavioral Science and Assessment at Climate Central. At Climate Central, she integrates behavioral science insights into Climate Central's work and improves its tracking of program success. Irina holds a PhD in social psychology. Thank you all for joining us today. So as a reminder again, if you can submit questions at any time by clicking on the question box, please try to keep your questions short and directed either to the whole panel or a particular individual, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible during our hour together. So what I'd like to do is start off with a question that I have for each of you, and that is, what were your personal and professional objectives in applying to the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships? And when you were, at the time you were applying, did you consider other fellowship programs? And if so, how do you feel this experience may compare with other fellowship opportunities? So Emily, how about we start with you with that question?
Sure. So I applied to the fellowship because I had always had an interest in applied research and applied social science, and in policy in particular. I had worked with local and state level groups on policy issues around sociological issues like social justice and some environmental justice issues. And so I thought the fellowship would be a great opportunity to do something a little different, to get some experience at the federal level in policy, to see how research works at the federal agencies. And I'd say that's been my experience here so far with the fellowship and being at the EPA. It's been a great way to see how research can, and particularly social science research, can impact the work here at the EPA, to get experience with federal level policy and research. I've been able to work with some interagency groups as well, and I think that's one of the key benefits of this fellowship is sort of that flexibility, being able to do a variety of projects, really to shape kind of your own interest in your own projects, and working through the network of current and alumni fellows as well. I did also consider applying to the Presidential Management Fellowship, and I think but I've been pleased to find out that the AAAS Fellowship in particular has a really good reputation here in among the agencies. People have been very welcoming and have recognized the fellowship and have really welcomed me to participate in different spaces, and so I think there's a lot of different benefits and a lot of room to shape it in the way that that you're interested in. So I think it's been great so far.
Great. Irina, so the same question for you. So your personal and professional objectives in applying to the AAAS Fellowship, or in your case, the APA Congressional Fellowship.
Right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I think that, so I'm a social psychologist, but I've always applied psychology towards environmental problems and climate change in particular, and I studied the psychological dynamics that underlies climate skepticism in particular, and now I look at science skepticism more broadly. So I don't think I had ever planned on staying within the confines of academia, and I always wanted to find a way to bring this into the world, and doing research is good, and you know, seeing ways that that can plug into things, but I was really interested in going into the field and understanding how decisions are made, what actually drives policy, and I had always studied the ways in which people respond to systems, but I really didn't understand how the systems themselves really work from the inside, and so this was a really good fit for me. I don't think that I could have ever understood how these things work without actually going into the actual decision-making process and being so close to power and being so close to the debates and the exchanges and the kind of understanding the pressures that decision makers are under. So it was an incredibly enlightening experience. I, in particular, was focused on the legislative fellowship because I really wanted to understand policymaking. And in the climate space, that's a place where there's a huge bottleneck, and it's also a source of a lot of the contention around the issue. And so for me, that was a really key place to find myself, so that I could observe and participate and really get to know how it works. So, like, there was a third part of the question. So
were there any other fellowships that you may have considered?
I did look at some more applied kind of psychology fellowships, but there's something so unique about the legislative fellowship where you are in Congress that once I found that, that was really my focus. I did eventually go on to do, maybe we'll talk about it later, another fellowship within the executive branch with the White House Social and Behavioral Sciences team, which is also something that is a very cool thing for social scientists to do, and that was not at all in the legislative space and very much in the development and especially implementation of policy. So that was also really useful, but I think for me in the beginning it was really legislation that I was after.
Great. And Ariela?
So I found that I was pretty frustrated that a lot of really cool research about development, about policy, and about regulation in the social science world was sort of staying in the social science world, that we would have conversations between ourselves and, you know, big fights, and it was very exciting, but then it went nowhere. And I thought that maybe there was another outlet to take all these deep thoughts and analytics and put it into a place where it could make a difference. So I applied to the fellowship with that in mind, thinking that I would continue to be a social scientist and continue to represent the kind of research trajectory I came from, but maybe work as a translational person as opposed to a researcher. And so that's why I applied to the fellowship, and I never anticipated ending up in an engineering directorate where I am constantly the voice of social science. So I do just what I intended to do, but in a place I never really imagined I would be doing it, and that's in formulating other people's research and having them keep it in mind when they're doing it. But I didn't apply to any other fellowships. I really didn't know of anything. I didn't know what a PMF was. It wasn't something that anybody really talked about where I came from academically. It was not a known path to leave the academy. So I sort of ventured out and blindly.
Right. So we've received actually a number of questions sort of related to the day-to-day life of a fellow. So can you each speak to some of the projects that you had a chance to work on? So Irina, in your case, past project you work on, and then Emily and Ariela, projects that you're working on currently. And then also talk a little bit about, in terms of how, are you able to work with your supervisor at your host office to be able to work on projects that you're personally interested in? Emily, I know you mentioned that earlier, that you had a chance to work on, some personal projects. So if you could talk a little bit about that. So how about we start with Irina? You want to talk about sort of in your side, in your case, it is Congress, so it's very different from Ariela and Emily's experience.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, when you work in Congress, you are you work usually as a staffer, either in a personal office or on a committee. Staffer meaning that you are a person who, to different degrees, handles a portfolio of legislation and issues for the congressperson, a senator, or the House representative. In a particular area. So I tend to focus on energy, environment, agriculture, land use, transportation, those kinds of issues, and those were the portfolios that I worked on. It's a very diverse set of tasks that you end up doing, everything from lots of communication with stakeholders and understanding what's going on for people, what kind of requests are they coming in with, what are the sort of the issues, the pressing issues, and getting all the perspectives on those, and really being the conduit between the constituents and, in my case, the senator. Worked for a senator from Colorado, Michael Bennet. And then you think about ways to deal with those issues, whether it's communicating with executive agencies in the government, or local level processes, or development of policy, and then you do a tremendous amount of communication within Congress with other people you want to collaborate with, or who may have related needs or opposing needs, etc. I think what I love the learning of it. I mean, just being thrown into the water and really having a million meetings to go to and briefings and learning about issues that were directly relevant to what I was working on, and also indirectly to get the full context of what was happening. I mean, it was definitely the year of the richest learning in my life, I would say. And also, I loved the diversity of the issues that I actually got to work on, and the sort of 0 to 60 process that you go through with every issue. You start out maybe having read an article about it in the newspaper, and then you end the day being able to like give a 2-hour talk on it. And I love that. And then what I actually really enjoyed are my meetings with constituents, which for a lot of people who work really long-term on the Hill sounds like it becomes a bit of a chore, but for me it was actually fascinating because people are so willing to talk about things that are controversial and difficult, and really not, not ones that you would necessarily be able to engage people on otherwise, but they're coming into places of decision making, and they're so excited to have, an ear to really share their perspective. And so I love that part of the job, and I love the fact that I could have like 12 really meaningful, convincing conversations with people with 12 completely opposing or inconsistent perspectives on the same issue, and they were all well argued, and I could ask really critical questions, which at first I thought, oh my goodness, here I am, I'm this like researchy person who wants to understand everything. These people are going to be so mad at me for asking things that really question their story, and that wasn't the case at all. They were very excited to have my engagement and to be able to argue their position, etc. So yeah, and just working with other really motivated, driven people who really care about their issues and who are willing to really carry them through. It's a very dynamic place. It was a great environment to be in.
So now turning to the executive branch. So Emily, how about we start with you? If you could talk a little bit about your portfolio of projects at the EPA.
Sure. So I think one thing just for everyone to kind of be aware of is that the daily life and what fellows do varies a lot from agency to agency. And so some people are in positions where they're working on sort of very fast-paced kind of turning around policy briefs and participating in briefings and responding to priorities and really, kind of harnessing their science knowledge for participating directly in that policy work. Other people like me are in more sort of research settings. So I'm in the Office of Research and Development at the EPA, which has, I would say, maybe is a more sort of recognizable pace to academics. We have researchers who are working on a whole variety of projects around sustainability. And so what I've done is tried to get to know those researchers and their projects and look for people who are working on things that are similar interest and background to what I wanted to work on. And so it was a process of, really learning what the program was doing and where I might be able to contribute something to the research. So one of the projects that I've been working on is a community level resilience assessment in a local EPA region. And so I've been helping contribute some participatory methods to that project. And so that's been a great way to sort of take some things that I had, interests that I had worked on before, and then kind of see how it fits in this research context, and help further those methods and those skills with the researchers here at APA. So that's one of the projects, and as far as sort of the daily pace of that, I think it would feel similar to people who have engaged in other research projects, although if anything, perhaps even slower, because there's more levels to the research here. So you're working with contractors who may be doing, or not EPA employees, but maybe doing a significant portion of the research, and there's various types of approval processes and planning and things that have to happen around that, and around publishing and producing final research projects. So it definitely, sort of adjusting to that timeline was one of the things to really think about in terms of your fellowship project. What can you really accomplish in a year or two, whereas the research timeline might be multiple years beyond that. So that's one example. Maybe I'll come back to other examples if there's time later.
Great. And then Ariela, can you speak a little bit about your work at the NSF?
Sure. So the NSF gives out money for other people to do research. We don't do research, but we do a lot of assessment of our programs. We look at budgets. We try to figure out if we're funding the right things, and we're always trying to find out what the next big thing is. And so in that vein, it's not so far from academia in that everybody's an academic, but it's also very Washington office, is that you're constantly wondering about budgets and are you fulfilling what Congress mandated, and could you get more money, or do you need to give back more money, or how are we going to balance it? So it's a very, it's a familiar environment with different requirements. And my portfolio looks at interdisciplinary environmental programs, and my big project was on something called Infuse, which is innovations at the nexus of food, energy, and water systems. And last year, when I first started, there were 17 workshops, and I got sent to most of them, and I was supposed to report on them and then help other program directors report on them and then read all of their outputs and come up with some analysis that would help NSF decide where to go next. And through the process, I learned a lot about what other people are doing. I learned about where my own interests fit in. So I'm a cultural anthropologist who works on food and the environment, but that is a different ballgame from the geographers and the geologists and the hydrologists and the engineers and the ecologists. So I really learned to move beyond my particular subject matter to a much bigger breadth of information. And I was able to produce something that my division and my directorate used to think about what they're going to do next or not do next. And that's kind of the pattern for me at NSF, is assessment, analytics, presentation, and then helping that drive whatever comes next. And so I do it with food, energy, water systems, but also energy and wastewater treatment and a variety of other things in that vein.
Great. So another question that we had was sort of related to what's the typical day in the life of a fellow. And I think based on the conversation, the different experiences that we're hearing here today, it's safe to say that there is no one typical day. There's a lot of different things and a lot of different projects that you're working on a daily basis, you know, on a weekly and perhaps monthly basis. Is that sort of a safe assumption to make? Great. Okay. So the other, given that the focus of this particular chat is the social sciences, so can you speak a little bit about what unique skill set and background that social scientists bring to the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowship? So Irina, perhaps we'll start with you first.
Sure. I think, as you're hearing, it really depends on where you are, and you might be using different sets of your skills more in different places, whether they're research skills or writing skills, etc. But I would say that you kind of use all of your skills in a sense, at least where I was. So from the perspective of research, you really go to Congress expecting that you would do research, or do research on an area, or even work in any way in an area that's like directly related to what your area of expertise is, on one hand. On the other hand, you're constantly doing research. It's usually much more fast-paced. You're obviously not, setting up studies, but you're taking in a tremendous amount of information, and you really have to have a very critical lens, and you have to be able to decipher all kinds of complicated relationships between things, and really think about the history of things and how that affects their progression and their current manifestation. And you also have to go through a tremendous amount of materials and do a lot of reading, and it's written in very different ways, everything ranging from scientific papers to a lot of reports that are put out specifically for government to use, which are well written but really rich in information, to media and letters and all these other things. So you're absorbing a tremendous amount of information and processing it, and typically coming out, first of all, with a cogent understanding, but also some sort of either presentation or written documents that summarize that in very, very brief and direct ways. So those analytical skills come in super handy. And then and just the issues are complex. Like, you really have to think about them. Like, it really makes you use your brain in a big way. And then the other thing is communication. So you communicate all the time. You communicate verbally constantly with your colleagues, with colleagues from other offices, etc. You write a ton, and you have to learn how to write very briefly, very to the point, really know what to put in there. So it really hones your communication skills in a big way. And then I was thinking that in my job, I really used my interpersonal skills a lot, and the ability to work with people at different levels of power as well. So your work, there's folks in your office who are interns, etc., and you really want to work well with them because they're supporting you, and then you're working with your senator and with other senators and with people who make really big decisions, etc. And that power gets carried by people in a particular way, and the ability to come in and really be comfortable in those environments so that you're both competent and comfortable is a huge skill, and again something that I think we bring in and then get to cultivate once we're in the office. And then I think for me what was really helpful is understanding the kind of larger social backdrop of where I was, because people, once they're in offices, tend to be really focused on the issues they're working on, because there's everything is so demanding and challenging, and you really have to put all of yourself into them in order to make them work. But it's wonderful to be able to come in with a broader background of understanding about what are the pressures that are happening here in these issues? Why have they become controversial? Or what really places priority on different things? So that you can have a little bit of that envelope of understanding around what's happening. And then I would say the last thing, which was really cool, is that in a sense, a lot of the fellows, actually independent of what discipline you come from, become like the nerd of the office. And so Colorado in particular has a lot of research centers, and so a lot of times people come in representing those centers, wanting to talk about either funding or specific research they're doing or some kind of innovations, and you are the person that often gets to talk to them and gets to, first of all, learn a lot about what's going on there, but also be this articulate, science knowledgeable person who can have a really high-level conversation in the way that your office probably can't without you. So that's really fun. Yeah.
That's great. Kind of again, looking at the executive branch side, Emily and Ariela, what would you say the skill set that social scientists bring to federal agencies?
Okay, I'll start. I think that one of the things that we bring is really good reading skills, and I know that sounds sort of funny and elementary, but I mean, social scientists read tons of theory, they're analytical, they can read between the lines, and they can compose large theoretical concepts that are mostly narrative. And I find that here that's one of the most important things, to be able to read carefully and to put concepts together in ways that I don't think other people pay as much attention to. And then to say, here, look what I see, and then to show them how narrative works is, I think is pretty important. I do think one of the interesting things that I learned here is that my expertise wasn't actually what was as important as those skills. So being able to write, being able to read a paper and critique it, and then being able to do the analysis turned out to be what really made me a benefit to my department, as opposed to my expertise in food, which is also interesting and helpful, but not in the same way as what they give me. So that's what I learned.
And Emily?
Maybe I'll add that it feels like a really good time to be a social scientist in the federal government. Actually, there's a lot of really increasing interest in the social sciences. Irina was part of a group called the Social and Behavioral Sciences team, which is really using behavioral insights to make policy and government programs more effective and more efficient. There's a lot of interest around that. And so just being in the agency, in the EPA, as a social scientist, even though my background is not really in behavior and many other things, but you get known, and people come and ask me for advice and ideas and thoughts on anything related to social science, which is really fascinating, and another way to kind of expand your brain and also to make connections. So I've gotten to participate on interagency working groups that are dealing with social science themes and issues. That's been a really fun experience to think, there's a lot of talk about How do we understand how policy works? How do we evaluate what we're doing is another sort of big area for anyone who has some interest in evaluation-related work. There's lots of room for that here. And again, even just your training in being able to ask good questions, I think, is one of the most useful skills that I've had and that I bring. You know, are we really asking the right questions in whatever projects we're doing? So I think there's a ton of room for social scientists here. Sometimes it's not always that apparent, and you might have to kind of push your way into to some extent, or just offer, you know, hey, have we thought about it this way? Or hey, here's another question that we could ask. But you can really see how valuable and impactful those skills are here.
Can I add something?
Yes.
So I think Emily is 100% right that it's a really great time to be a social scientist in the government, but it is still a very big challenge, and that should not be glossed over. But it's a good challenge. So at least in NSF, qualitative methods are not nearly as respected as quantitative methods, and that is a big challenge. And it also takes being a really loud person, like Emily said, but in a way that's almost sometimes forceful, saying, you know, have you asked these questions, and this is how you might answer them in a different way, or maybe that way of answering a question is not really getting to the problem. And there's still pushback about that, and it's complicated a little bit sometimes when you come from a qualitative background to make that a smooth interaction, but it's a good challenge because somebody's actually listening and reacting to you, not necessarily just saying, oh, we don't do that at all. At least it's a conversation being had.
And I think you bring up a good point. I really hit, you know, on the nail in terms of the unique skill set that social scientists really bring to the Policy Fellowship, and really that sort of that qualitative background, kind of focusing on that a little bit more. So thank you for adding that. So one of the questions that we just received is related to the application. So they're asking, the question is, could you outline what are some of the pitfalls to avoid in the application specifically for social scientists? So basically is what should an applicant not say in their application, if anything? So how about we start with Emily first. So when you were applying, any advice in terms of what not to include in an application?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question, and I'm not sure I really know. I'll tell you how I approached it. I guess when I was applying, I hadn't really talked to other fellows, and I was, to be honest, kind of unsure about the place of social scientists in the fellowship. I was unsure of how sort of social sciencey to go with my application, I guess. So what I did. Because I had done my dissertation research on climate change, but from a sociology program, and so what I did was really focus on, made sure that I incorporated some of the more sort of natural science. Well, actually, that's not the right thing to say. I think understanding what are the big questions around the issues that you want to highlight in your application is where you start. And that's sort of regardless of whether it's a natural or a social science question. It's understanding what's the big public policy interest in this area, what are the big questions, and what do you have to contribute to that. And when you start from that framing, then you can then you really just highlight your expertise and the way that you want to contribute to it. So for an issue like climate change, like I had, it was sort of a mix of kind of natural and social science, just by the nature of the issue. But I think the key is really to understand what are the big societal and policy questions, and frame your application around that.
Great advice. And then Irina?
As a legislative fellow, I was accepted as a fellow through the American Psychological Association, and there's this beautiful collaboration between the science societies and AAAS. And so if you want to be a legislative fellow, you would be applying most likely to a specific science society or possibly to AAAS, which also has a few legislative positions. So it will depend on your society to some extent, and what they're interested in, and the extent to which they feel like your background, your skills, or your interests match whatever it is that their vision is for the fellow. But I would say that for the American Psychological Association, I don't think they were particularly concerned about exactly what, certainly not what research I did or the area in which I worked, but much more about how much would the ability to give me a year on the Hill would be a benefit to, myself as a practitioner or as a person who has a particular vision or career path, and would that help me move on that path? But also how much would it be a good fit for the kind of interest I have and the way that I approach problems and the way that I see myself making a contribution in the world. And also, I think the extent to which kind of like the thinking of the fellow or their way of approaching things sort of matches a policy space, because it isn't a research space at all. It's much more about doing and being very active and interacting and constantly learning, and that's a much better fit for some people than others. And I also think that we as fellows, especially because when we're paid by the science societies, it is their investment into the future of the whole that discipline of science in creating a bridge to policy, to government, to practice. And so I think they also want to support people for whom, again, that's a good fit for what they want to do going forward. Do they want to be a bridge? Do they want to create a kind of way of working that both, brings in the science and the discipline, but also really invests in the long term in that, creating that connection. So, and then I think the other thing that they looked for, at least maybe this was more at the time of interviews, or when you write a policy brief, you really want to see you can write, but in the interviews also, like, can you handle that environment? Are you comfortable in it? It's really a question of fit, I think. So generally my attitude towards these things is like, be honest about what you're interested in, what your strengths are, where you want to be learning, and just like, just make sure that that it is your thing, because if it's your thing, it's awesome, and if it's not your thing, it's probably a little overwhelming or boring, or something like that. And as far as like policy experience goes, for example, I know that for the APA, they're not looking for people with policy experience, because it's an opportunity to expose somebody to policy, and if they already have another that's not, you're kind of wasting the opportunity there a little bit. And so they're really just looking for that motive and that drive and that kind of fit, rather than any one particular thing you're bringing in.
So Ariela, any additional advice that you'd like to add in terms of what not to or what to include in an application?
I think that the application I think it's three parts. The first is explaining what you do. The second part is thinking about what policy does, and the third part is thinking about where you're missing a step or a piece of knowledge or something to help you do that policy or to connect the dots. And that was what worked for me. But I would give one piece of really tangible advice, and that is, don't pigeonhole a particular office that you want to be placed in. Rather, think more broadly about the topics that you're interested in and which agencies have those topics as part of their strategic plan, and then be open to going to a place you never really thought you would be in. And so just be careful not to be too clear. Be clear that you have interest, but not too clear that you would only go to one place.
Great, that's excellent advice. And so kind of related to the application process, and this question is specific to Ariela and Emily because it relates to the application for the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowship. The question is, did you apply to more than 2 tracks when you were applying? And then if so, how should you go about sort of tailoring the application for each program track? So can you speak a little bit to that?
I applied to DSD, the Diplomacy Security track, and to the Energy, Environment, and Agriculture track. And I didn't get into the DSD track. And recently somebody asked me for my application, and I looked, and it was very clear why I didn't. My background, my specialties, and my interests are mostly in agriculture and environment. So when I applied, I didn't make a strong enough case for branching out beyond the Food Security Bureau at USAID. I didn't, and I think they could see through that a million miles away. So that was a big difference. But the track that I'm in is the track that I should be in my opinion, for this year. And it was because it was much more specific about what my needs were at that particular moment.
That's great. I think that's what a lot of fellows find too, is that while, you know, they kind of have to envision what office they would potentially be in, but then the office that they end up at is really sort of what they realize is, you know, that was sort of the best fit for them in the end. So Emily, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think that relates to my experience as well. I just applied to the one track, and I had a little bit of trouble choosing because, again, as a sociologist, there are multiple places you could fit. But what I wrote my application about was what I was really interested in working on. And so I was just kind of honest in that way about that. This is what I really want. This is what I'm really interested in. And then I think that was why I was able to write the best application about it. And I think that also helped because the position that I wound up in was actually really close to what I articulated in my application I was interested in doing. And so I think it was just kind of that natural fit and I didn't know that the position existed when I applied. I had no idea what positions would be offered. I had no idea if there would be anything that would be even close to what I wanted. And I was ready to not do the fellowship if that was the case, if there was something, if there just wasn't anything that was a really good fit. But it turned out that there was a place that was a good fit. And so I think that writing the application based on what I really was interested in just, you know, helped me land where I land and helped produce the best outcome.
So another kind of question relates to the day-to-day life of the fellow, and specifically the question is about your daily schedules and then just overall in terms of work-life balance. And I know that on the congressional side, it's very different versus on the executive side. So maybe Ariela and Emily, if you want to kind of speak a little bit about your work-life balance as it relates to your individual offices, and then Irina, you can kind of speak a little bit about how that works on the congressional side. So maybe Ariela, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I know not every executive agency is the same, but NSF, like I said before, is sort of half academic, half Washington office. And so a lot of that academic culture flows through, and it's an easygoing workplace. You don't have to wear a suit here, except if you're going to a meeting, and that is a relief to many of us. But it also means that there's flexibility in hours, that, you know, you can go to a briefing or you can go to a meeting downtown and come back, and the real question is, have you finished your work? You know, if you haven't finished it, you can't go, and if you have finished it, then good, because it's assignment-based. People are understanding here of your time, and they're respectful of it. There are more after-hours requests than I would like, but that is the reality of working in a fast-paced office. And I think that my day-to-day is more meetings than I've ever been to in my whole life, lots and lots of meetings. Some of them are great, and some of them are administrative, but you have to do it as part of the job, and you learn by going and by being present and being professional. And then most of your work is on your own, you know, your own schedule. You have to get it done, so you have to be able to moderate your time in a way that gets it done.
And then Emily at the EPA.
Yeah, I think it's generally very similar. Maybe I would just add that where I am, I'm not expected to check email on evenings or weekends, and so I don't. So I have a very, in compared to a lot of, you know, academic work, it's a very nice work-life balance.
And Irina, I know on the congressional side it is very different, so share with us your experience and your time as a fellow.
It's a fun day. Every day is different. It depends on whether Congress is in session or in recess. During recess, when there's nothing going on, like the actual Congress people are back home. There's no voting happening. It's a much more chill environment. People catch up on things. They write and do all these things that are more long-term facing, and so it's just more fluid. In session, typically you come in early in the morning, you read the news, and you kind of get a sense of what's going on, both in your general area, like for me that would be climate, energy, environment, and also in the state in particular. Then you have lots of emails and communication. You usually have a bunch of meetings with constituents throughout the day, and a couple of meetings with either people from your office or other offices. If there's voting happening, your life is completely ruled by that, especially if you are the one who's made recommendations for those votes. You're constantly available to your congressperson, so you're working on other things at the same time, but at any moment when a vote is called, you're the person walking with her or him to the floor, and you're talking about these things, and you're sort of in the flow of, you know, the schedule is sort of set, but it's updated constantly depending on what's happening on the floor. If you staff your senator or congressperson for meetings, again, you've prepared for that. You might chat with them quickly about it. Then you're in those meetings. And so you have to be very fluid. There will be calm days when you can just focus on stuff. There will be days when you're running around the whole time. A lot of times people manage to go home at decent hours. Sometimes when there's a big thing happening next day, you might be there for a while preparing voting recommendations and such. So it's really different. And then as a fellow, you usually have a little bit more flexibility. You do go to a lot of briefings, a lot of hearings, things that are interesting, and it really depends. And a lot of times people say that be ready to have like super busy weeks and weeks when you feel like, what is this job about? Like, what am I doing here? You know, and they might switch one into the other so quickly. And so definitely that speaks for me for better long-term planning, but also it's just the reality, because just sometimes the opportunity for things comes up, and then you just want to put all of yourself into them. So it differs, but people do manage to have a decent, you know, work-life balance. It's not like that all the time. There's just moments of a lot of excitement. I also just want to, I just want to say real quick, I'm going to have to hop off in about 4 minutes, so just letting you know.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay. Ariela, I think you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when you're a fellow, you do get time to do professional development stuff. So probably one day a week, I mean, they say maybe 20% of your time is for professional development, which can mean anything for having coffee with people you would like to meet in Washington to going to AAAS events. And so that is a big help in making the work-life balance, because you're not always in the office, and that's really an advantage of not being a straight employee, but being a fellow, is that you do have this flexibility in your time.
And AAAS has great programs that you can use that time towards. So it's, again, it's a lot of learning.
And I thank you guys for both bringing that up. So as part of the fellowship experience, AAAS offers the fellows an orientation, which is the start of your fellowship year, and then monthly professional development workshops on 3 main tracks. We have a policy track, we have a communications track, and leadership and career pathways track for these workshops. And in addition to the monthly workshops, fellows also have what are called affinity groups, which are special interest topical groups, which allows fellows to kind of do a little bit more further networking in areas of, you know, particular interest to that. And I know that there's a social sciences affinity group, which both Emily and Ariela are involved with. So I'm, you know, kind of asked to speak, if you guys could speak to that a little bit and just talk a little bit about the work and the role of the social science affinity group.
Okay. I'll start. So Emily and I are the co-chairs of the Social Science Affinity Group, which is a group of social scientists or social science-friendly people who get together on a monthly basis to have a beer, to talk to other social scientists, or to do social science capacity building for some of the other fellows who might be interested but might not be well-versed in our methodologies or our theories. And our first Ask a Social Scientist happy hour is Irina. She's our scientist, and she's coming to visit us. So we just try to make it a place where we can either talk about issues in our offices that might be difficult, or just talk about things that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about in a really long time. So it's a great little network of other social scientists or people who are interested to just get together and hang out and learn something new, and I enjoy it.
That's great. And I know before I have you speak, I know Irina has to go in just a minute here. So is there any parting advice, Irina, that you would give to people who are considering the fellowship program or just broadly want to get engaged within science policy?
Thank you so much, and I apologize that I have to run. Yes, I mean, I think along the lines of what you guys are saying about the Social Science Affinity Group, this is, first of all, the fellowship is amazing. You're part of a huge community of scientists who are very diverse, and you get to learn so much. And you can always find somebody working on the thing you're interested in some office who is currently or previously a fellow. So, like, you're entering a family of really smart, really dedicated people who really know what they're doing in DC, and it's priceless. I mean, to be immediately entered into a community like that, that would take, you know, decades to build, is a huge deal, and I think I benefit immensely from it. I agree with what you guys were saying before. I think it is difficult to be a social scientist, in part because of methodology, but in part, I mean, I'm a quantitative social scientist, but it's because people think of economics as social science, and we really have to bring in a knowledge and understanding of the diverse set of things we do and what we can contribute. And I do find that there's openness to it, but it takes perseverance. You know, you gotta bring your thing in. But I think there's a ton of realization that without social science, things that agencies and programs are aiming for are not going to happen. And in a climate space, that is definitely the case. And it's almost become kind of trendy, the idea of like, oh, let's bring somebody who understands people, because this isn't really working, and they don't really know what this behavioral scientist will really do. And so you can come in and you can educate and you can set an agenda, and there's really like, there's an interest and an energy, and this is a very good time. I really agree with what you guys were saying. And then, yeah, and like I said, I went on to do another fellowship, which was specifically social behavioral science fellowship through the White House and the GSA, and that was, you know, really interesting and fascinating. And the other thing to understand is this fellowship gives you access. You're in a huge institution that has so many resources, and can of course be difficult because of its size, but it's like just a direct path that takes you right into the belly of the beast. And so if it's something you're interested in, it will give you both the insight, but also the kind of capacity and the intuition to do, you know, a lot of interesting things going forward that brings your field, because of course you can then come back to it in different ways, together with application, with that dynamic quality of you know, what happens in the government. So I loved it. Highly, highly recommend it.
Thank you for that, Irina, and thank you so much for being able to join us today. I know it's a very busy week. I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. Really a pleasure for me.
So Emily, kind of going back to the question about the social science affinity group, if you wanted to add anything to that. I know you also have to leave early, so I'll ask you also to kind of, after that, share some of your parting advice with the group for people who are considering the AAAS Fellowship Program.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's been so fun to be in the social science affinity group and just have that sort of space where we can, you know, talk about what's going on, and it's, you know, I think a lot of us probably aren't necessarily, you know, that identity as social scientists isn't something that you had in grad school or where we came from, with a more disciplinary identity, but it's been really helpful to talk to people in other agencies about, you know, what they're experiencing and how they deal with some of the challenges. And I've learned, you know, some languages for how we can talk about our work as social scientists. And it's fun to see people who are, you know, don't have social science backgrounds sort of getting excited about social science and how they can you know, apply some of the methods and theories and things in what they're doing as well. So so that's been a really fun. The affinity groups are a fun way to connect with other fellows, even when you get sort of busy later on and wrapped up in your own things. And yeah, I guess just as sort of final, I think this has been, you know, it's a really great thing to do, to take your experience sort of beyond the traditional academic roles. We have people who have come, you know, during a year on sabbatical from where they are. We have people who are just out of grad school. We have, so it's a range of ages in the fellowship, a range of backgrounds and experiences. And so getting to know people has definitely been one of the funnest parts. And I think, you know, it's been mentioned a couple times, but the network is also so fun. And I think compared to some of the other fellowships, like we have a really great network in DC, and it's fun too, to have, you know, you really come in with this sort of cohort of people who are going through the same things at the same time. So there's a lot of kind of support there too from the other fellows, which is nice, and which the affinity groups are part of as well. So yeah, I guess, you know, one of the things that happens when, you know, you get asked to do things, so I have to host a conference call at 3, so that's why I need to go and set it up. But hopefully this has been helpful to people, and thanks to Salaeha for having us on.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily, for joining us. Appreciate it. It's great advice for everyone. And so I think we have just time. We're almost coming to the end of our hour. We have just time for just one more question. So Ariela, this question is for you, since you are now the lone fellow on this chat. So this is about your post-fellowship. So how do you intend to use your experience in the fellowship with your future career path? So basically, sort of, do you have a sense yet of what you want to be doing post-fellowship, and how do you think you're going to be able to use the fellowship experience in that?
Still working on a plan, to be honest. But there's been a couple of lessons that I learned here that I had not learned in the university. So the first, which I think will apply to any job in government as a social scientist, is that there are no disciplinary boundaries. So while I thought interdisciplinary work before as a social scientist was working with a sociologist and an economist, that is not the case here. We are all one, and we are all social scientists. And so those kinds of pre-existing disciplinary boundaries just have to drop away, and you see yourself as a whole. And I'm not an economist, but I can talk about economy, and I have to learn how to deal with the economists in such a way that it's productive, because we're on the same team here. So that's the first thing that I think will go into any social science position that I look for in government. And then the other thing, which is a real benefit for me for the fellowship, is that I really got beyond my discipline or social science space. I learned what I think is a whole nother science, and that's environmental engineering. And I didn't have to go to graduate school to do it, and I didn't have to do a postdoc. I learned by doing, and being able to talk to recruiters or to people who are looking to hire interdisciplinary environmental scientists. I now have a much stronger sense of what that means, and I have examples to prove that I can do it. And I think that those two issues are things that will point my direction to do more environmental work that's applicable, but really understands both the natural, the physical, and the social sciences more broadly.
Great, and I like that learn by doing. And so I wanted to ask you the same question that I asked Irina and Emily as we wrap up the chat, is to kind of give parting advice for people who are considering either the AAAS fellowship or just broadly wanting to engage in science policy.
I would think deeply about what you want to get from the fellowship. I think that it depends if you're going back to academia in the same vein, or you really hope to make a shift to do more policy research, or you want to bring the application of research to policy into your world. I wouldn't take this step lightly. It's a big change from academics if that's where you're coming from, and it's a big step from industry if that's where you're coming from. But you should just really think deeply about what your goals are and what you hope to get from it. And if there's even an inkling of being excited about working in government, then this is the best way to go for scientists, hands down.
That's great advice, and great advice to end the chat with. And so now that brings us to the end of our hour together. And so I wanted to thank Ariela, Emily, and Irina for joining us today and taking an hour out of their busy schedules to share their policy experience and insights with us. And I wanted to thank everyone for all of your wonderful questions. And if we weren't able to get to answer your questions during the chat, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. And then plan to join us on October 11th for the final chat in the series. During that chat, the entire hour will be devoted to answering your questions. So if you are considering applying to the fellowship during the current application cycle, this is a great opportunity to have any last-minute questions answered before the November 1st application deadline. And I encourage everyone to visit the fellowship's website for the full list of chats that are in this series, as well as on-demand links for previous chats. And you'll also find full details and information about the fellowship program, as well as the application process. And I want to, again, thank everyone for joining us and our fellows for joining us, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.